So welcome to week 2 of Women of Valor. Last week we talked about Eve and our assignment as those that increase, those that were created to bring increase and walking in love and doing that. This week we're going to talk about Sarah, who was first known as Sarai. So I gave you guys a little bit of an assignment last week that not all of you were happy about. And it was to read up on Sarah, to figure out, like, yeah, she was taken twice in her life that we're made aware of in her 127 years of life. And just to kind of consider that as we look through the characteristics of the noble woman that is outlined for us in Proverbs 31, and we look at the assignment that we're given as women that God gave to Eve and passed on to us through her. And so when we get this introduction to Sarah, the first thing that we are made aware of, other than she is Abraham's wife, is, oh, by the way, she's barren. Which is an interesting way to be introduced to a character. But that's what it says in Genesis chapter 11, verse 30. It says, actually in verse 29, it says, and the name of Abraham's wife was Sarai. And then verse 30, but Sarai was barren. She had no child. This can seem extremely harsh as an introduction, but you also have to remember that we are looking at a genealogy. This chapter, this portion of it was on the descendants. So it was kind of important that they noted who had, because that's what they were doing. This person begot this person, begot this person. And so they were noting that this is where Abraham's bloodline stopped, or at least his father's bloodline stopped with Abraham on that vine. So it seems super cold and like a rude awakening to enter into Sarah's character and history as that. She's a wife and she's barren. Any thoughts on that as you guys started to read through Sarah?
It's interesting that it was God who closed the womb.
And she knows it because she says later, the Lord has not allowed me to have children, right? And she says she already knows, because of her relationship with Abraham. He probably came home one day to say, hey, listen, I had this conversation with the Lord, and he says we're going to have a lot of children. We're going to have a lot of descendants. And so, okay, so she waits, and she waits. And she waits.
Well, was it, I don't know if it was Abraham who said it, or that's when she heard in the tent that God, she heard God say to Abraham.
So the first time that God made it aware to Abraham, it was in a dream, right?
Right.
It was in a vision. And the second time, it was the three angels that came up to his tent. And that was when Sarah was about 89 years old, because the word was, and this time next year, you will have a son.
And she overheard him. And she laughed.
Yes.
Because he says, God has promised, and she knew God withheld her from bearing. So that's when she decided that she was going to try the alternative way.
Yeah. And we're definitely going to get into that. So there's some things that I'm glad you guys looked into her history, because I want to look at her timeline, because I want you guys to consider the Proverbs 31 characteristics as we go through this. And to name a few, of high value, trusted, brings no lack of gain to her family, seeks to do good, willing to do the work of her hands, providing nourishment for her family and those in her household, gives to the poor, not fearful, works with strength and honor, and speaks law and kindness, right? And fears the Lord. That is one of the last things it says about the Proverbs 31 woman of character. And so keep that in mind as we go through this chapter, because Sarai and Sarah, same person, go through so much that it's relatable. And so on the other side of that, or rather in tandem, I also want you guys to consider what the fruits of the Spirit are. And see if you see those mirrored in the Proverbs 31 woman, as well as Sarah. And so the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, long suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control. Okay. So as we go out through the beginning of Sarah's introduction in that lifetime, Abraham was 75 years old when they left their father's land. That makes Sarah 65, right? She was 10 years younger than him. And that's when they started their journey to Egypt. Let's go to Genesis chapter 12, starting at verse 11. I'll give you guys a minute to get there. It says, and it came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai, his wife, indeed, I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore, it will happen when the Egyptians see you, that they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me. But they will let you live. Please say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, that I may live because of you. So it was when Abram came to Egypt that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. The princess of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. Man, courage. Apparently, Sarai endured being taken against her will due to her beauty. So much so that her husband predicted that it would happen. He didn't say it might. He didn't say there's a chance. They're going to take you. If they remained where they were, they would endure a famine and starvation for their whatever people that were with them, or cattle or livestock. And remember, they had their nephew Lot with them, right? But if they continued, the risk was narrowed down to simply her. And that was a risk he was willing to take. We will all survive if you are at risk. That's a lot of courage. Go ahead.
You know, it's not only her life, but also now what's at stake is her character. They're going to look at her later on when she leaves Egypt. Because, you know, women are going to talk. They're going to talk. They're going to talk. You know, there's no doubt about it that when she leaves there, there's going to be talk, even though, you know, Pharaoh provided for them and gave them, and they did multiply, but still her character's at stake. You know, like, did he or did he not? We'll never know.
Yep.
You'll hear that.
So consider that initial assignment that Eve gave us, right? Or that was passed down. We are to increase what is before us. When we miss seeing the fruit of our work, we think that we are literally unproductive. We label ourselves as barren. We walk into a job description and think that's all that's meant to be done. We think that as long as it looks exactly as that job description, we've done what we were called to do, but there's so much more that happens behind the scenes before you're considered successful in that, before you reach that goal. And we miss it if we don't understand what it looks like. Go ahead, Diane.
And you know, a lot of that is built in our DNA. It's passed down from generation. I'm reading a lot of history books about slavery and Native Americans, you know, the history of, you know, the erasure of Native Americans and people of color. A lot of this thing was just about how dumb and stupid and irresponsible we were as a people of color. That became a part of DNA. So we've had to throw that out of our imprint of our life and build ourselves up. And as women, it's been even worse. So we have to take this generational issue,
Mindset. Yeah.
mindset out of this, and put, look at the inner beauty and the inner strength that we have, and shed those inhibitions that, we're inferior, this, that, and the other.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because it is the work of the devil to take us away from our assignment and from what God calls us to do. And so if we're meant to increase, the devil is going to try to take away any kind of value that we can have on ourselves, because the first characteristics of a noble woman is worth far more than rubies. So if I can get you to believe that you're worthless, then as Satan, I've done my job. Because if I get you to believe you're worthless, you'll never try for anything. You'll settle for everything. Exactly. Whatever happens to you, you stay victimized and you never rise up out of it, because you don't believe that you have any worth. And the first thing that we're told is, this woman of noble character is worth far more than rubies. So
and at that time, a woman's value was that she had to give, one was childbearing.
That was
that's
it.
one. That wasn't it, but that was
according to the
main
men,
thing.
that's what
Right.
they looked at you. They looked at you they wanted to see, like, if you had those childbearing hips, they looked at how many kids did your mom have? That kind of thing. Oh, that's good. That's good.
I mean,
well,
even,
back then,
yeah,
the lack of good medical care, women did die in childbirth if they weren't equipped to handle it.
or if they didn't have a wet nurse, or
Right.
a doula. And a
Mhm.
lot of, back in the day, there were doulas and nurses in the community that helped women go through that childbearing, because again, the injustice of the lack of quality healthcare, the isolation, the inactivity, all those things that came a part of what is a part of our life, what part of our DNA and our imprint. And again, I remember hearing, as a young child, we went to visit a relative in Pennsylvania, and the aunt, she was the elder statesperson of the family. And she looked at my mother and said, "So all you got is these two?" And my mother said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, I thank you for that." And it goes to show you, that's how women were looked at, as how many children you were born, how many children were born by you. And my mother was like, "Yeah, I got these two." That's it. And the aunt she was taken aback, like, oh, but she came from generations of families where they were like 10, 12. But then again, you got to look at what those children did. They had to work the fields.
Yeah.
And a lot of them died in childbirth or died early in life due to, again, the injustice of lack of health care. The mothers did not have prenatal care. It was unheard of.
Yeah.
So again, we were, as women, were looked upon as to, that's all you gave us,
But even that shows how we are survivors of all of that and overcomers of all of that. Everyone on this line today is here from someone that survived that difficulty of childbirth through their mom, right? And through sickness and through whatever medical care we had to combat life with. And that we're still here putting up that fight. So I again implore you, that assignment of the enemy over our lives to take away our value. We were created in the image of God. We were created as a helpmate. Absolutely.
Hey,
Courtney,
Jenny, I had a quick thought while the kids are occupied. I'm sorry, it goes back to the first verse, but I was busy when you asked our thoughts about it. So when I read the story of Sarai, and I first read, like, this is Sarai, she is barren, and I thought, well, that's rude.
right.
I mean, I get why, but still, like, as you talked about, like, the culture during that time, like, that was kind of a stigma. And then I thought, oh, well, I would hate to go down in history like this is Courtney, and then here's her stigma, or here's her insecurity, or here's her shameful moment. And I personally kind of wrestle with that a little bit, even, you know, all these years later, knowing how the story ends. And oh, here comes the kids. So, but to wrap it all up quickly, if you can hear them in the background, the thought was read the rest of the story, right?
Yes.
And so, like, when I get caught up and my brain tells me, oh, this is Courtney, she's just her shameful moment, or this is Courtney, she's just her insecurity. Like what hi boo, what I took away from this was, you don't know the rest of the story. You don't know how I'm going to use that shameful moment. You don't know how I'm going to use that insecurity of yours to bless not only you, but generations to come. So, okay, I got to go back now, but
Thank you for sharing. No, that's exactly what we need to consider. Like, our story isn't over yet. There's more to come. And if we stop reading the book right now at this page or at this chapter, we're left at this moment of Sarah's life. So here we are in the middle of chapter 12. And it says, like where I left off was, and she was taken to Pharaoh's house, right? The rest of that is, he treated Abram well for her sake. And it says, he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys and camels. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because Sarai, Abram's wife. Mommy tried to call and ask earlier about this, right? Well, this is how Pharaoh became aware that something was wrong. There were plagues on his family, on his household. And so it says, and Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this that you've done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now, therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go your way. So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. Do you not hear the increase in what Sarai brought to her husband and to her household? Let's walk through that again. Pharaoh treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. That was given to Abram for her. There's your increase. It wasn't done right by any means. And we look at, well, where's the child? Where's the fruit of your womb? She brought increase to her household. That sacrifice that her husband said, well, if we go forward, you might get taken, but we'll survive the famine. And so she brought that increase to her household by being obedient to what her husband asked her to do. And that is not always comfortable. We miss the increase if we're not paying attention, if we're only looking for one thing. What does that say to us? Like, look beyond what you normally see and evaluate all of it. This is the womanhood that we're talking about. And what happens? Sarah gets taken again. I'm going to skip over to chapter 20. We're going to bounce back and forth, right? So if you go over to chapter 20, verse 20, this is now after the covenant that was established between God and Abraham. And so in chapter 20, Abraham was leaving Sodom and Gomorrah and headed south. And so it says, and Abram journeyed from there to the south, starting at verse 20, and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur, and stayed in Gerar. Now Abraham said of his wife Sarah, said of Sarah his wife, she is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, indeed, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, and he had said, Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? Did he not say to me, she is my sister? And she, even she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart In innocence of my hands, I have done this. And God said to him in a dream, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart. For I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now, therefore, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. So Gerar gives Sarah back to Abram and explains what happened. And in verse 13, it says, and it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house that I said to her, I'm going back a little bit just so you can get this. This is your kindness that you would do for me in every place where we go. Say of me, he is my brother. And then Abimelech took sheep, oxen, and male and female servants and gave them to Abraham. And he restored Sarah, his wife, to him. And Abimelech said, see, my land is before you. Dwell wherever it pleases you. Then to Sarah he said, behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Indeed, this vindicates you before all who are with you and before everybody. Thus she was rebuked. There's more increase right there. He was given 1,000 shekels and more land wherever to go, more herds and oxen and male and female servants, right? I want you to consider two things. Abraham was 76 when they left, and there was about 11-year time span between her being taken the first time. So in the middle of that, Lot, their nephew, was with them traveling, right? Because that's who left with them from their father's land and went down to Egypt with them. And after they increased from being down by Pharaoh in Egypt, they became so huge in numbers that their herdsmen began fighting between each other. So they separated, and he said, look, this land is before you. Choose, you go left, I'll go right. And what did Lot do? He looked up towards the Jordan and he said, this looks beautiful and bountiful and you know, good for bearing fruit, right? Or a land of plenty. He said it looked like Eden. And so that's where he went towards. And Abram again chose what looked barren to receive. But Abram, just like Sarah, in what looked like barren, ended up receiving so much more in the direction that he chose. And it's hard to see that at first. But when you go back and, as Courtney said, you read the rest of the story, you find out that the area that Lot went to was not as good as it looked. And that land, Sodom and Gomorrah, was destroyed. Matter of fact, this is what gets me going. Abram had to go and rescue Lot at one point, actually twice. Bring that back. Abraham had to rescue him the first time, and then he went over to Sodom and Gomorrah, and he had to be rescued again. When the three angels came to him and he was talking with God, and he said, you know, will you destroy this city for 40? Will you destroy it for 35, right? And so Abram went back to save his nephew twice. How many times did he go back to save his wife? I'll wait. He didn't go back to save his wife. He accepted the fate before they even entered into the land. But he fought for his nephew. That really does something to me when I realize all of that. And so you're willing to fight for your nephew, but not your wife. And so you can say, because as I was evaluating this, and I was like, well, he was at least maybe possibly 86 years old and this, okay, but he went and fought for Lot at this same age. Well, you know, he was going up against kings. He was going up against an entire nation over there as well. He entered the land before the trouble even started and said, this is probably going to happen to you. So if we reflect on Sarah for a moment, before she made some really challenging decisions that we know her for, let's talk about the courage this woman had to have to be this man's wife. knowing
you
that
look at what he said, it's like you're expendable. That is what he's saying. She's expendable.
and that's hurtful. That's real hurtful. Now, if you go back to chapter 11, verse 31, it says, and Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. It doesn't say, and his daughter Sarai, it says, and his daughter-in-law. And I bring that up because I want you to consider, like, was she in fact his sister? Or is that what he just said to keep himself safe? Because in the genealogy, for everyone else, it says, and they begot sons and daughters, and they begot sons and daughters. But here, Terah had 3 sons, and they left it at that. And when they reintroduced Sarah or Sarai as Abram's wife again, it doesn't say, and his daughter Sarai. It says, and his daughter-in-law, his son, and they stress his son Abram's wife.
Was it because women doesn't have that much value, even in the genealogy?
There are plenty of genealogies that give the names of daughters, because there's
I mean,
the whole half tribe of Manasseh, right? So there's question. I don't know whether or not she was in fact his sister, or if she was his wife and he was just telling her, look, save my life and please tell others that you are my sister. Because when he goes through that, the reasoning later, it's, no, indeed, she is my father's daughter, but not from my mom, right? That's what he tells people. But
half
here,
sister.
right, but here, when Terah's his descendants are described, Sarai is only described as Abram's wife. So there's a little bit of question for that. Any thoughts on what she had to endure being taken these 2 times?
So, as you were saying about defending and that he didn't defend her, I'm thinking about when the Holy Spirit talks to me, and he has spoken to me before things have even happened.
Mm.
So did Abraham have such a relationship? He said he knew what was going to happen. Okay, she was beautiful. And maybe it was, he just knew it because the culture, because of, how they were there. He just knew it. But was it also because the Holy Spirit told him?
So that's a good point, but I want you to consider, would the Holy Spirit tell you to lie?
No.
And the Holy Spirit would not say, hide your wife's identity, because that's the whole reason why Pharaoh and the king, their households were plagued. So if it wasn't a curse to take her, then why would God tell Abraham to do that?
No, I'm not saying God told him to lie, but he forewarned him.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. And
Well,
sometimes
we don't. Right.
forewarning sometimes gets us in trouble.
And so we don't have knowledge of that. But what we do have knowledge of is that God has spoken to Abram in dreams and in visions, and even visited him in person, right? When he sent the 3 angels. So God has spoken to Abram a number of ways, but we don't have any conversational history or verses that say, Abram, tell them she's your sister. Abram, continue going to Egypt, where they are going to take your wife. In fact, the purification ritual for accepting a wife is about a year back in those days. They had to bathe them in rose petals and perfumes, and it was a year-long process to cleanse the skin. to be acceptable for a king. And even when you go through the story of Esther, right? That was a year-long ritual purification of bathing and
That's-
oils and fragrances, right?
That's
So
why the king hasn't touched them. That's why the king
exactly,
didn't touch it.
exactly. That fruit looks good, but I can't just yet. It needs to be washed, right? So he says, you know, thankfully, I haven't touched you yet. Thankfully, I haven't taken you as a wife yet. So we are also in that given a bit of a time period, less than a year that she was away. So that helps to kind of connect those dots of how long, right? So in the middle of this, remember, Abraham and Sarah were married for a long time at this point. We don't know exactly how many years, but they were married when they left their homeland when she was 60. And so now at the age of 76, being kidnapped once already, Sarah makes a desperate attempt. And here's where I have a question for Abraham. He was a prophet of the Lord, as you had mentioned. And God gave Abraham the promise and the covenant. So why didn't Abraham ask God if taking Hagar to bear his child was the right thing to do? Right? Men make mistakes too, and it seems like a good idea since the one who is his helpmate and supposed to bring him increase suggested it. This is where we need to forgive ourselves for what seems like a good idea in the best interest of someone else. And we end up hurting ourselves really bad trying to do that.
Isn't it also because if you see in Eve, right? It was her who said, and according to Adam, made listen to his wife. The same thing is repeating again with Sarah.
It's what you call a generational problem, right? Like, if you're meant to increase me, and this is the word that you give me, and I listen, what happened? Like you said, both Adam and Abraham had a direct line to the Father. So reach out to your father and ask, this is what was suggested. Is this what you're saying I should do? Because he did that with everything else. It says the only reason he left his homeland was because God told him, get out from your father's country. That's a lot to move your whole household, right? But you did it because God said. And so when God said, and you will have descendants as innumerable as the stars, and his wife goes, well, I can't do it. I'm 76 years old. I'm past the point of childbearing. You know, I no longer go to the tent, right? I no longer have my week where I'm separated from everyone. How now when I'm old, will you bring me joy? Like all of that is being said, right? So she looks at her Egyptian slave Hagar, right? Where did she get acquired? When Sarah
Probably
was
from Sarah.
kidnapped, and they gave female and male maidservants, right?
Male servants.
There's a really good chance that Egyptian slave Hagar
was one of them.
Was one of them. Yeah.
And I was thinking about Hagar also because nobody asked her if she wanted to go to bed with Abraham.
But being enslaved, you had no voice. You had no choice. Mm-hmm. He was the head of the household, and the head of the household was the commander of what goes on. So, and you know, again, Sarah was just trying to, it was something that was done. It was just done without question, without disapproval, without saying no. It was just done. That was the law of the land back then. There were no rights. Women had no rights. But yet she, in love and obeying with Abraham, was able to say, you know, they're taking me so we can live, you know, we can have prosperity in our household. And, you know, look what women do now. We kind of do the same thing. Take on extra jobs, take on more of the responsibility because we want our households to flourish.
Yeah.
And Jenny, if I can add to that, looking at Sarai and her to make the decision to offer her Hagar, her, I guess her, I don't want to call her her slave,
Mason.
but her handmaiden to her husband. I kind of internalized that personally, because as women, we're fixers. We want to fix things. And she knew there was an issue. And to me, she did it, she took it upon herself to do it. Not necessarily that God told her to, but she's trying to fix this. And,
Mhm.
you know, as human beings, we try to fix stuff sometimes without consulting God. And I won't even say human beings, I'll say me, you know, because you want to fix it. So you think it's right because I got to solve it. I got to solve it. I got to solve it. I got to fix it. It's a problem. Instead of first, just for me, stopping, look at it, go to God, pray about it, and then wait until you get that answer for him to tell you what to do. And I think, you know, I can relate to that. She was just trying to fix the situation, you know, like I've got to have my husband's seed go on. How do I do this? So you know, I to me that it just, I don't know, kind of hit very personal with that. Like it's very relatable.
But
Now,
She
but
rationalized.
but wait a minute. The slaves were given to Abraham. The male and female slaves were given to Abraham. How was Sarah able to, you know, were they hers as well once she was
yes,
back to Abraham? Did she
yes, it was her maidservant, because he says in one verse, I have given you this maidservant to do with whatever you want with under your hands.
That's right. That's right.
Mhm.
That one.
Yeah.
That one.
So again, go ahead, Courtney.
Oh, I was just gonna say, tying it back to, you know, some of the trauma, I'm gonna call it trauma, that she had went through previously. I think, you know, I can relate to this because sometimes when we hear, or when we have an idea of what God has in store for us and we think it's too big for us or it's too great for us, but because of, again, going back to like our sin or our shame, and you know, I know I can think of at least a dozen times where I've delegated a blessing to somebody else because I thought I wasn't worthy of it.
Mm, that's powerful. And that's exactly what happened between Hagar and Sarai, because yeah, like she considered what she went through. Like again, she at this point, I feel like she was testing the waters. Like, well, I know I'm barren, but maybe if he sleeps with this female servant, we'll find out if it's both of us or just me that's the problem. You know? So when Hagar conceives, it's like, okay, well, it is just me at this point. And for 14 years, Sarah had to look at Ishmael. She had to look at Ishmael, Abraham, and Hagar. She had to study their features that all had similarities. She saw the bonds that were created at her request because she created that atmosphere. She carried that hurt and damage. But even in her age at 89, Sarah was so beautiful and desirable that she was kidnapped again, right? That second time. You know, like you're 89 and so desirable that the kings are fighting over you. So the one thing that she felt she was missing was that child. She had her husband, they had wealth, they had land, they had maidservants, but she was looking at what else am I supposed to produce? I want you to consider that we will still increase what is given to us. And that's not always good. Sometimes we increase anger. When anger is fed into us, we increase hurt when hurt is thrown at us, right? And so when she was trying to work a blessing, she created both because Abraham was blessed. Abraham was extremely blessed. And God said, this is what will happen to your seed. So there was a promise that was passed down through Hagar. Ishmael was going to become
Great nation.
a father of many nations, right? Of 12 tribes as well. But those 12 tribes would endure hardship, would endure slavery, would endure a lot more than he was supposed to as the son of Abraham. If it had been done the way God had suggested it, God had written it out. So when we try to multiply things on our own, we end up with things that are less desirable than the way God had planned it and orchestrated it out for us.
We lean to our own understanding.
Yeah, but she did multiply her household, right? Isaac was an increase. Ishmael was an increase.
She wasn't happy about it.
Nope.
No, because it wasn't in the way that God had told her. I think is the one thing that I was stuck on, because I'm a fixer as well. I like to fix things, but there's a difference between not having an answer and then having an answer and being like, oh no, you can't do that. So like when we're talking about God has already told you, like, I'm going to bless you. You just have to wait. And because of her impatience and her disbelief, like, she didn't have the faith that some of the people had in the Bible where they're like, oh, my servant needs healing and is, oh, bring me to him. No, just say it. And I know it's going to happen. She didn't have that. And because she decided, well, you know what the Lord has said, I know what he said, but that ain't going to happen. So I'm going to make it, I'm going to make it happen on my own. And then, it was kind of almost childish to me, the reaction, because you put this into play, it happened, the child is here. And then later on, you're like, hey, this slave woman that you had a kid with, never mind the one that I sent you to, it was upon my request, you got to get them out of here. I can't stand looking at this every day. I know I wanted this, but I didn't really want it.
Man, there's so much to be said in that, because you also consider that after Hagar and Ishmael are there now bonded with Abraham for, at this time, about 13 years. That is the second time that she gets kidnapped or taken by the king, right? She had to live in the king's house. And I say that as if that's a horrible thing, right? She had to be living in this king's house and cared for, all the while knowing that her husband had a family without her. That's not a good feeling. And when she was finally released, had to walk back to her husband and her maidservant and their child. That's a lot of pain.
And don't forget, she was also concerned about the inheritance she helped build.
Yeah.
All the sheep, the cattle, the servants, it was because of her. It was because of her. And then by Hagar having this son, she was upset that he's going to get the inheritance. No, I worked for this. My fruits should be given the inheritance. And I totally understand. She was totally upset, like, he's getting the inheritance that I worked hard for and no one else did. Of course she was upset and she was distressed.
I think it's not just that either, but also Hagar, her attitude towards her changed too. She was condescending at times and belittling. And it's just like, yes, I brought this woman into my life, and now I am, being treated less than even by my own maidservant.
Yep. There was a lot of heartache and blood's being spilled between the two, to the point where Sarai sent her away. Well, she started to treat her harshly, and I believe it said that she was beating her as well. And so Hagar ran away. And that's when
maybe also the fact that Hagar might have thought herself to be on the same level as Sarah, because she was able to bear that child. And you know how we are. Come on.
Now let's go a step further, because when you go into the Hebrew meaning for everything that happened here, Hagar was given to Abraham as a wife. That's what Sarai did. Yeah, she did that. And so the conversation, when you go back between maidservant and wife, the Hebrew word that is used gets put in there interchangeably. We have it as one version in our English language as maidservant, but when you go into that Hebrew translation, Sarah gave Hagar as a wife. She said, take my maidservant and turn her into a wife and have a child with her. And God steps
Why
in
do
there.
they list her as concubine? They listed
did
her
they-
as they
Where
listed
at?
her as concubine.
In the
Well, no,
in the
that's
end of,
couture. Sorry.
yeah, I was like, not here.
No.
But God steps in and corrects that. And he goes, hold up. And I'm paraphrasing. He said, I said, through your wife, you will have many descendants. And then he says, through your wife, Sarah, in case you're forgetting which one I'm talking about. Right? In case you're further confused because somebody put something in front of your face and said, what about this? And you tried it. That line of communication between Abraham and God was open. And sometimes we don't use that line of communication that is there for us. And we go around consulting each other instead of God and say, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is the best course of action? How can we solve this? The truth is we can't solve anything, not without God's blessing. Yeah, that's
So one thing that I learned in the study for Sarah just picked up, and I know, I don't know why I didn't put together, but that Hagar was the first one who named God. She was the first person who named
the
God.
God who sees me, Elroy. I love that you picked up on that.
Yeah.
There is Beersheba that's also listed there because it is where Abraham built up the well, and that's within these chapters as well. Because they came to him and said, well, you're not going to find any water in this land, and he digs the well, and then the water is provided, and that's God is named after all of the things that he does for us. But like you said, Hagar said, you are the God who sees me.
First one who named God.
And not as a slave, right?
Not as a slave. Because before he did say you're a slave, but then the second time he did not.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And created he put in there provisions for her and her son to continue living. So, man, to be seen by God throughout all of this. As you said, the woman who God says we are worth far more than rubies, but then we are traded as cattle almost, right? And so for this servant girl to say, he is the God who sees me, not just me, but my 14-year-old, or I think probably 16-year-old at this time, because this is after Isaac is born and she is sent away, right? So her son, Isaac, is a teenager.
Yeah, he was getting
In his late teens. Not Isaac, I apologize, Ishmael. Ishmael is a teenager, and they get sent away, and he's to the point of weakness where she leaves him by a rock, right, with the last bits of water, and says, I've got nothing left, and I can't watch my own child die. I can't watch my child die. And so she goes off to cry far enough where, like, I know you're there, but I can't hear you crying anymore. I'm drowning in my own cries, and I'm crying out to the Lord. And so the God who sees me appears. And he tells her, I will save you. And so we have two women here that bring increase, right? And it's not always done the right way. But Hagar brought forth that child who did become many nations. Hagar did increase Abraham's household as well by bringing forth that seed. And so Sarai brought so much wealth to her husband just off of her beauty. And the lies that were being told about, here, she's just my sister. But Sarai was also going through a lot of pain. Am I worth only my beauty to you? That we have to look outside of ourselves to produce a child? Is that all that is of value? But again, if that is all you see, then you miss the rest of the increase of their household, of their nations. They were so great of a people, not before they left their father's household, but after the first time she was taken, that they had to separate from their nephew, right? That's a giant increase. I want you to consider the wrongness that was done to both Hagar and Sarai. Because Sarai treated Hagar so unkindly after she did what she was told to do. And yeah, there was a lot of bickering between them, as Alicia brought up. Like, you know, Hagar started to look at Sarah like, you know, I'm better than you. You kind
I
of
can
put
do
her in that
something you
position.
can't.
Right. You kind of put her like, you have all this beauty, but I produce a child. Right. So I feel like it was this back and forth. Like, I'm just a slave, but look what I can do. And you're beautiful and you provide for the wealth of this household. But look what, you know, it's this back and forth of what position do you hold and who's got Abraham's attention.
And sometimes that even goes on in today's life, where a man will have a child by another relationship, and a woman he marries may not have a child, and the woman with the child is constantly like, well, look what I got, you know, I got him because
Mhm.
I have a child, and is the one who is married to him is looked down upon.
Mm-hmm.
She cannot produce an heir. And then again, that's when friction comes into play. Again, generational DNA.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Sarah felt abandoned? Abandoned by who?
Both God
By
and
all.
Abraham. Both God
And
and
she
Abraham.
abandoned herself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I do think that she felt abandoned by her husband and by God. Like, if you are able to open and close my womb, why is it closed? Right? Because we don't have all this understanding. We're not at the end of the book. We're walking through it. I don't know that in 14 years at the age of 90, beyond any other time where women are giving birth, that I am going to produce a child. I don't know that, but I feel abandoned right now. And that doesn't mean that I am abandoned, but when you feel that way, it's not something that you can ignore. It's a very real pain. But it's not the end of the story.
So one important thing also is that, again, that there was resurrection in the womb.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Her womb was brought back to life. Because at that point, the blood was no longer flowing. And what do you need? Life, for life to continue? Flowing blood, right? Very good point. Her womb was resurrected for such a time as this. And here's the thing. Some women can have, as we pointed out, 10, 15, 20 kids. I worked with someone who was like the 20th child, and he had a news article about how proud he was that he was the youngest of 20 children or whatever it was. I was like, okay, great for your mom. I'm proud of her. Great job. I don't know what to say to that, but you know, he loved that fact about himself, that there was a news article celebrating that he was the youngest of this innumerable amount of family members. But the one child that Sarah had was the one that counted. We might do so many things as Sarah did and produce the wrong thing, right? God is supposed to bless the works of our hands. Well, if we're working iniquity, that's not what we're supposed to do. That's not what we're called to do. And so when she was placed in the wrong atmosphere, she bred the wrong things, right? When she was in Pharaoh's household, what happened? Plagues, right? When she was in King Gerard's household, everyone there was barren. She increased those circumstances. So in the wrong circumstance, she increased wrong. And in the right circumstance, she brought wealth, she brought prosperity, And eventually she brought a nation from her womb. It isn't always what it looks like. So just like Sarah, I want y'all to consider this week, what is it that you've been connected to, that you've touched and increased? Did you increase love, or did you increase hate? Did you increase understanding, or did you increase frustration? There are times where something gets said to me and I'll respond back with, or I'll want to respond back with sarcasm. And I've got to, nope, absolutely not. That's the old man, hold that back. And Shartisha said, maybe both. Yeah. And so I have to ask myself, what am I, before I respond, what am I trying to increase? If I increase wisdom, then hopefully wisdom will be given right back to me. And that fruit will increase. But if I increase, if I meet with sarcasm, and if I respond with less than knowledge, then what am I adding to in that conversation except frustration? So consider what you're connected to. Are you adding to love? Are you adding to the atmosphere in your household in positive ways, and the people that you encounter on the street, on the road, in the stores, and for some of us in schools, right? Or at work? Because you know that when that one person walks in the room and they got a bad attitude and they say something off to you, you want to respond the same way, right? And my husband and I, we arrived at the hotel this afternoon, getting ready to check in. Like I said, we were spending time with our youngest son. And as we walked up to the desk, the lady behind the counter immediately had an attitude. And something rose up in my flesh, and I said, how are you doing today? And I called her by her name. She had a name tag on. I said, ma'am, how are you doing today? How was your day going? And I saw her do this. It wasn't much, but there was some arming happening. The anger or frustration or whatever it was that was bubbling up inside of her came down just a bit, because somebody took the time to ask her about her. She's not just here to provide a service. She's a whole other human being that needs to be acknowledged.
And sometimes that's all you need to do to disarm someone. And it can either go, when you walk into a conversation, it can either go left or right. And oftentimes I understand now retail is one of the most difficult jobs to have in life. And oftentimes when you go to the register and you can see and you can see the person trying to be, how can I help you? And sometimes I'll stop and say, take a deep breath. How you doing today? Hi, how you doing? And smile. And sometimes that basically can help. Hey, hi, thank you. Thank you for asking. My day's going terrible, but acknowledging is so important as human beings, because that gives us affirmation that we are, I'm here. You are affirming me as a human being. You are affirming that I am here to take care of you, and you appreciate me.
Right.
So anytime I go shopping, and if I go to a clerk, I just go, hi, how are you doing today? And I thank them. I thank them a lot. Thank you for your service. I appreciate it. And that really can set a tone for the type of conversation and transaction you're going to be doing. It also helps you too as a person to know that you gave affirmation and love and sincerity to another human being.
Right.
I do that, and I try to find something to compliment the person on, because I don't think a lot of people realize how far just I really like the way that your makeup is done, how far it goes for some people. I really like this outfit or your shoes or something like that. Like just that quick is this huge boost And it's like, oh, thank you. I've had this forever, it's a conversation at that point started off on a, positive note.
That is so undervalued and so needed. Because as we started out today's study, we talked about how for generations we've created this picture in our mind of how women are seen and how women are used and what our worth used to be, or what it no longer is at times. And when we come back in as Elroy, right, the God who sees me, when we see each other, we acknowledge each other as more than what's just in front of us, as more than a service that is being provided to us. That humanness comes back in, and we're able to bond more with each other, and we're able to see beyond that curtain. It is so necessary these days. We are more than, like when we look at the Proverbs 31 woman, those are fantastic characteristics that we should strive for. And when that woman is tired and she goes to bed, like, can she rest, right? We are tied to everything around us, to the people around us, to the homes that we're in, to whatever children we're connected to, the jobs, the spouses, you name it. Every atmosphere that we're connected to asks something from us. And it's exhausting. And we do need to replenish each other. And when we pour into each other, it's a refreshing that we need. And Sarai created this atmosphere with Hagar, and it became toxic. And they could have poured into each other because that's what Sarah asked to happen in the first place. And Hagar had no choice in the matter. I mean, I gotta watch my words, but I'm thinking like, if I was Hagar and I had no choice, I might feel some type of way too. I might respond in a not so, happy-go-lucky, cheerful, love you every moment type of attitude.
That's fair, especially if like we weren't there, but if Sarai was being passive aggressive because she was upset about the fact that there was this child here that she couldn't have, I'm not about to be smiling in your face all every day.
Right.
I didn't even ask for this.
Right. Exactly. I got taken from my home to be your maidservant. Now I have to, be with your husband and add a child to him that I have to take care of, because first I was taking care of you and your maidservant. Now I'm a mom too. So I got to take care of this child and myself and you, like, thanks. Could have stayed home for this, right? So yeah, you're right. We only have a small window into the lives of these women. And I want to know how you guys see yourselves in them, because there was a lot of trauma in both. And dare I say, even some joy. Because at the end of Sarah's life, for the last 30 years of it, when she said, when God came and she says, I didn't laugh. Yes, she did laugh, right? And she, a year later, gives birth to Isaac. And she said, anyone who hears of this will laugh with me. I now have life. I now have this joy. And Hagar, who was seen for quite some time as a maidservant, was now the only one able to produce what Sarah couldn't. And there was some joy in her heart until she got sent away and thought that child was going to be stripped of his life for lack of food, for lack of water, lack of nourishment, not lack of love. So these two women who are intertwined, they did both increase each other, as Eve's assignment is to us, to increase that is around us, right? But they also cause some pain. They increase some pain. They increase some trauma. I think about the hardship of Sarah's life, of being a pawn, something like you said, expendable, not only for for your safety rather, but for your wealth. And that was courage to walk in as a wife. It says that the Proverbs 31 woman, her husband trusts in her. And that's what Abraham did when she said, take my maidservant. He trusted her. That is the characteristics of a noble woman, right? Her husband trusts in her. And he did. The atmosphere around us, does it reflect evidence of us having noble characteristics? Does it reflect evidence of us bringing godly increase or not? I want to go back and forth real quick and just kind of take you guys fast forward a couple generations to the Israelites, right? The great-grandchildren, the great-great-grandchildren, the great-great-great-grandchildren of Abraham and Sarah. They were just like their forefathers and foremothers, that when they left an area that was inviting to provide them during a famine, right? Because that's what happened. Jacob went down to provide for his family during a famine, right? Or Joseph rather. Joseph went down, and his brothers came on. He brought all the brothers and their families and their tribes, and they increased so much there during a time of famine, because they were farmers, right? That the next king, saw them as a threat and enslaved them. But when they came up out of Egypt, they plundered everything around them. They left with increase. They left with gold. They left with silvers. They left with coin. They left with food. They walked out with timbrels, right? And carts and donkeys. The first time their great-great-great-grandparents walked out of Egypt from Pharaoh, they left with cattle. They left with maidservants. You see the generational wheel happening, that cycle? And all of that because Miriam was obedient. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. Miriam protected Moses, right? Who was then later utilized to bring the Israelites up out of Egypt. And so let's look at our generations. Let's look at the cycles that are happening in our lives, in the lives that come before us, and even in our children's lives, and say, what is this cycle that's happening here? Is this a cycle of increase or not? It is so hard these days to put on the 50 hats that we do, right? And to still have time for ourselves, to still be of sound mind. There's so much expectation on a woman. And we don't make time to consider just how much we do increase, just how much we add to the room. Because all we see, raise your hand if this is you, is what's left to be done. We don't ever look at what we accomplished. We don't even feel accomplished. We can have degrees on the wall. We can have whatever in the bank, and we can still feel like we haven't done or accomplished anything. Because all we see is what is left to continue doing. This week, I want you guys to stop and reflect on all that you've accomplished. because none of you are here by accident. Your birth is purposeful, and you are here to bring increase. And like we talked about last week, all you had to do to prove that you are a woman was exist. There was no other requirement. We still try to fill the void and prove with whatever additions that we make to our physical countenance, look, I'm woman enough. God says you just have to exist. I already created you as a woman. You don't have to continue to prove that. But your assignment on your life is to bring increase. Your assignment on your life is to bring kindness, to bring joy, to look at the lives of others that are around you and say, you're blessed because God, through me, is going to provide for you. That's what the Proverbs 31 woman says. Sarai did that. Through everything that she had encountered, she increased the household innumerably. And I'm not talking about with children, but yeah, even through her descendants, more than the sands you can count in the sea, right? Mm-hmm. Prior to even that, she brought wealth to her household, and the servants were fed and they were cared for. And Lot was able to be rescued twice, even though she wasn't. Well, God rescued her, right? God fixed what they both broke. And each time God fixed it, right? Because
even when Abraham put her in those positions, on 2 occasions, God prohibited anything from happening. He protected her.
He protected her. God protected her because she came out from her covering at that point. And God protected her. So that goes back to she probably did feel abandoned because she didn't see God working on her behalf. And just because we don't see it doesn't mean it ain't there. There's so much going on behind the scenes. Again, just because the job description says you have to produce a cake. Wow, does that mean I gotta go and just buy the cake, or do I gotta go and grow the wheat to get the flour and the chicken to go get the egg and milk the cow and all these ingredients? Like, all of that is part of the process, but produce the cake, right? However you go about it, and that's what she tried to do. I produced the cake. Here's the child of Abraham, Ishmael. And God said, I ain't tell you to do it like that. Here were your instructions. Even before God gave Abraham the knowledge that he would not remain childless, there was still an increase to his household just because Sarah was a part of his life. And I'm telling all of you today that just because you are part of the lives that you're connected to around you, you have brought increase. I know each and every one of you personally, and I know that you bring increase to the people around you because you are powerful women, extremely powerful women. I want you guys to consider that this week. There are some things that we need to tweak on, like the times that we do withhold our kindness from others. But I want you to consider the value that you do have, that you often tell yourself is not enough. Last week's assignment was to remember that you are enough. Did anyone have a hard time with that this week?
Just unmuting myself. Yeah, I was tested since yesterday. And we met last week. So but yeah, going into this week and going through the prayer that we said last week and in last week's meeting, and just preparing for this week, definitely felt like I was tested to remember that I am enough, because so many things kept happening, you know what I mean, to just like, wait a minute, no, I am enough and it's okay.
Yeah.
I was at the library late last week, and I was getting my books. I wasn't getting the books that I wanted to get, but I got the books. And there was a child, I was in the room where the kids played, because that was the only computer I could look at. And there was this little boy who was just, laughing. These kids were laughing and giggling and just, being kids. So as I'm leaving, another child was screaming at the top of his lungs. I mean, he was just, to the point where he was just almost convulsing. So I checked my books out, and I was standing by the another desk where they have magazines and other periodicals, in our community. And this little boy was just screaming and crying, and he was just having a convulsion about. And I turned around and I walked over to him, and I crept down and I said, "Why are you crying?" And he stopped, and he was convulsing. And I said, "Why are you crying? So why are you? I know, I hear you so sad." And he said, I want to play. I said, "I know. There are times where I have to leave things that I'm having fun at. And we got to go home. We got to get dinner going." And I don't know what I did to this kid, but he just calmed down. And he was just, and I said, "Okay, let's take a deep breath. Come on. Take a deep breath. Oh, blow it in, blow it in, blow it out." And the mother standing looking at me like, she got this kid to calm down. And I was like, "Come on, let's take a deep breath." I said, "Okay, now remember, you can always come back here and play and be around your books. But you have to go home because dinner's important. You need nourishment. So when you take nourishment, that gives you enough strength to come back here and have fun with your friends. Okay?" And by then, his tears were drying up, and okay. I said, "And what is your name?" He said, "My name is Hawk." I said, "My name is Miss Diane. Give me an elbow. Come on, give me an elbow." And he locked elbows. And the mother looked at me like, "Thank you." Because she was beside herself with this child laying out, screaming and yelling. And I said, God told me to be here at that moment. Because you can see the people in the library, this kid, the library is supposed to be quiet. You're supposed to be able to concentrate. And this kid is just, you can hear his voice going from bouncing off the walls from one end to the other, screaming at the top of his lungs. And I just had to stop and turn around and say, "Hey, buddy, what's wrong?" And I think his mother at the time was dragging him out, "Come on, we gotta go. And she was frustrated too. She was very frustrated. And I could see that. And I left smiling. I said, "Wow, I hope that I was able to give that mother and that child a bit of calmness for the day." And the mother, I said, "So go home and have a great dinner." I said, "And I know you got books at home, right?" And he said, "Yeah." So we'll go home and you and mommy read some good books and have a good night. And you can come back here another time and get your books and have a good time with your friends, okay?" And he, wiped the snot off his nose.
Oh no.
And I said, "Okay, have a good day." I said, "You have a good day." And the mother was like, "Thank you." And I said,
It sounds like you brought some peace to that entire building. And
"Yeah,"
that is what you increased, because that is what you fed into him as you talked to him. And that's exactly what you were doing, carrying out this Proverbs 31 woman.
yeah. And even the librarian checking out was like, she was looking at me like, she leaned over saying, "Thank you." Because,
I've been there.
The child was he was beside himself. And I said, for that moment, at least I was able to bring something to that baby, something to that mother, some sense of peace and tranquility. And they grabbed hands and they trotted out the library together. We kind of, I walked behind them and they were swinging hands. And I said, for a minute, thank you, God, for giving me the opportunity to bring peace to this frazzled mother. Because I could tell she was just at her wits' end with him. And "We're going to read books." She said, "Yes, we're going to read books." And I was like,
she was definitely having a hard time, and you were able to help that out. And that goes back to that was a small window into this woman's life. And as we are given a small window into the life of Sarah and Hagar, they both had some serious trauma. And so what does that say for us? You can be the mother of nations and still go through some stuff. You can be blessed beyond measure and still endure some serious trials that don't nobody else want to deal with. And we think that because we're going through a trial, that we are discarded, that we're forgotten, that we're abandoned, and that there is no purpose for us. That's when it's important to stop and say, God, maybe I made a decision without you. Help me understand where I'm at right now, because I might need to be pulled back a little bit. I might need a course correction, because I know what you promised me, and where I'm at doesn't feel like it. It's not the end of the story. It's not even close to the end of the story, because there's still generations upon generations upon generations that came from both Hagar and Sarah. But in that moment, those many moments, they were distressed beyond measure because of the assignment that was over them, to care for, to increase for, to be part of, to be connected to. Give yourselves a bit of grace and a bit of forgiveness, because if our coverings are making mistakes and we're making mistakes and we can't forgive ourselves, how do we ever move forward? If we wallow in yesterday, how do we move in tomorrow cleanly? The Bible says you need to shake the dust off your feet, to kick it off of your heels before you enter into the next town, right? If they've rejected you, it says do this and walk cleanly into that next town. So when you are leaving behind yesterday and the decisions that were made in yesterday and the mistakes that were made in yesterday, take a deep breath, wipe the dirt off, and move into tomorrow. And ask God, am I supposed to go left or right? Am I supposed to head towards Sodom and Gomorrah because it looks all pretty like Eve or Eden? Or am I supposed to head towards this other direction that looks barren, but it's really going to increase me? We're not meant to create it all. We are meant to add to. God creates it all, right? We increase what's given to us. So when you're feeling all tight or wound up or fearful or anxious, ask yourself, what seed was given to me that I'm increasing, that I'm feeling this way, that is bounding up inside of me? What do I need to uproot and throw behind me so that I can move into something better? Because not everything is meant to be planted inside of me. Any thoughts on that, ladies? For me, in our household, there's 5 children between my husband and I. And there's a countless amount of jobs that we have and hats that we wear. And then, like I said, starting school again. And it's this balancing act of life. And it's, what am I going to increase, right? If you've got these scales and this one's increasing, then it seems like nothing is getting done properly here. And if I'm increasing here, then it seems like nothing is getting done properly here, because your time is so divided. And that's when, as we say, take something off your plate, right? Balance it back out. I need to stop and ask God. For me, this is what it's saying to me. What am I not supposed to increase? What am I connected to that I shouldn't be? Am I connected to a pharaoh? Am I connected to a king rather than my husband? Whose kingdom am I trying to increase? Because there's only one, and that's God's kingdom. And he'll tell me how to do it, because it's his house.
think to kind of piggyback off of what you said about, what is God trying to tell us as far as maybe having too many things on your plate, for instance. So last semester, when I first started school, the goal was to quit my job, right? And to trust God, right? To walk in faith, because everything, pretty much all the doors opened up. So, the whole goal was for me to quit my job. But towards the, when it came to me putting in that 2-week notice, I kind of started questioning God and, just really not trusting that that was the best move, and just constantly asking family members for advice. And so I kept working, even though it was incredibly hard going to school and, having a full-time job and a family, right? So towards the end, my job laid us all off. And so it was so funny because it's like, had I trusted God initially and, quit my job and had that removed off my plate, I probably would have performed better. You know what I mean? Because it's only, you can't give your all when you're being pulled in multiple directions. Each direction is just getting a mediocre piece of you. You know what I mean? It's like
Yes.
you're busy, but you're not really getting anywhere. So, it's just an eye opener. And yeah.
And that definitely speaks to me, because I've been battling those same decisions. Like I'm working this other ministry, but that's dividing me from the one that I've also lifted up and started. And yeah, I mean, it seems like it's of the same mission, but it isn't. So it does seem like like you said, I'm producing mediocre in some places, or not giving what the full attention of what I should.
Yeah.
So my daughter's on the line, and we had this conversation earlier today about, course load and trying to balance that with work. And sometimes it's manageable and sometimes it really isn't. And as you said, something is going to take a hit. So, this stepping in faith, when we're obedient to God, and afterwards we see the fruits of it, because, faith means you don't have the answers. You don't know what it's going to look like. Or maybe God told you, but you're still thinking out of your own mind what that picture is going to look like at the end. And you want every bit of the answers on the way through it. Well, tell me what it's going to look like on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, and then on Thursday. And he says, here's what the end result is going to be. Trust me through the process. And when you're asked to stop working at a location, but that's what's been providing for you. This is the same thing when I left the military, right? That's all that it has provided for my family for 22 years. And I had to say, no, God has provided for my family for 22 years, longer than that. Not the military. God made a way using the military, and God's going to make a way using whatever else he puts in my place. And so when God calls us to take that step of faith first, and we ask him the temperature of the water before we jump in, that's not faith. All right.
Yeah.
We seek reassurance. So I see a lot of myself in both Sarah and Abraham and Hagar, because I have tried to make things manifest out of the works of my own hands instead of trusting God and how he's going to do it. And in Hagar, where I do feel like I am the sum of everything that is happening around me and happening to me, and I don't have a choice in it, right? I'm just here along for the ride. I have felt like both of those ladies. And it is an emotional roller coaster, and it does take courage. It takes courage to get up every day and keep going. And even after Sarah was given Isaac, Isaac was a teenager when Abraham said, hey, son, do me a favor, carry this wood up to the mountain so we can go and sacrifice to the Lord. Okay, Dad, where's the lamb? Yeah, just carry this wood. I got the fire, don't worry about it. Okay. He was a teenager. He wasn't a little boy. He wasn't a toddler, because toddlers aren't asking questions like that. And you're not putting a wood load inside of a toddler's hands, right? When you go through the Hebrew story about how this happened, he was definitely a teenager or older. And so he's going up to this mountain to sacrifice to God, to the altar. And that's an awkward conversation. But the story that we're talking about today is not about the two of them. It's about Sarah. You're telling me I waited 90 years to give birth to this child for you to take him up the mountain to burn him? There were some fights in those tents. There was definitely some arguments in those tents. There was some heartache in those tents. But that wasn't the end of the story. And at the end of that story, and it's still ongoing today, they were both blessed. They both had a direct line to the Lord. They both increased their household and their nations. They produced love. And it was a story that we should reflect on. So I want to close out, one, by asking you guys for prayer, but I also want to ask you guys to consider how you see yourselves in these two ladies. And how do you see the courage in them? And do you see that courage in yourself? Because there is a strength to the work that we have to do every single day, and the demands that people ask from us every single day. Any prayer requests?